There is a psychological truth most people never realize. The traits others attack in you are often the traits they cannot accept in themselves. Every human being carries a hidden side, impulses, desires, weaknesses, ambitions, and insecurities they have learned to suppress. From childhood, we are taught what is acceptable and what is not. We are praised for being agreeable, punished for being too loud, too emotional, too ambitious, too different. Slowly, we begin to bury the parts of ourselves that do not receive approval. But what is buried does not disappear. It waits, and when it sees itself walking freely in someone else, it reacts. When you walk into a room confident, unapologetic, disciplined, self-expressed, or emotionally honest, you unknowingly awaken something in others. You activate the parts they were told to silence, the courage they abandoned, the authenticity they sacrificed, the risks they were too afraid to take. This reaction is not conscious. They do not sit and think, "Oh, I am projecting my unprocessed insecurities onto this person." It feels real to them, immediate, justified. They experience discomfort, and the mind searches for a reason. You become the explanation. If you are confident, they call you arrogant. If you are quiet and observant, they call you judgmental. If you are ambitious, they call you selfish. If you set boundaries, they call you cold. Notice something: the criticism often mirrors something they secretly struggle with. A person who feels deeply insecure about their own lack of discipline will feel irritated by your consistency. Someone who feels guilty about staying in a mediocre life will feel threatened by your growth. Someone who has suppressed their own voice will feel uncomfortable when you speak freely. You become the mirror they never asked for. And mirrors are disturbing because they do not soften reality, they reflect it. Most people would rather distort the mirror than confront what it shows. So instead of asking, "Why does this trigger me?" they ask, "Who do you think you are?" Projection is a defense mechanism. It protects the ego from collapse. When a person encounters a trait in you that contradicts the identity they cling to, tension forms. That tension must be resolved. The easiest solution is to externalize it, to locate the problem outside themselves. If they feel inadequate, they convince themselves you are fake. If they feel envious, they convince themselves you are undeserving. If they feel small, they convince themselves you are overcompensating. This is why your growth can provoke hostility from people who once supported you. When you were operating within the same limitations, you felt safe to them. You validated their worldview. You reflected their level of ambition, their level of emotional awareness, their level of courage. But the moment you expand, the reflection changes. Suddenly, they see what they are not doing. Your discipline reminds them of their procrastination. Your fitness reminds them of their neglect. Your emotional intelligence reminds them of their reactivity. Your independence reminds them of their dependency. It is easier to resent you than to re-evaluate themselves. There is also a deeper layer. Sometimes people do not just project their weaknesses onto you. They project their suppressed strengths. This is even more powerful. A person who once dreamed of building something meaningful, but gave up, may feel anger when they see you pursuing your dream relentlessly. Not because they want you to fail, but because you embody the courage they buried. Your bravery resurrects their regret. Your authenticity confronts their compromise. Your progress exposes their resignation, and regret can turn into resentment when it remains unprocessed. They may not consciously hate you. They may even feel drawn to you. But underneath that attraction is discomfort. You remind them of unfinished business within themselves. You remind them of the person they abandoned in order to be accepted. And that reminder hurts. Humans are wired to maintain psychological equilibrium. When something disrupts the internal narrative, I'm doing fine, I made the right choices, this is just how life is, the mind will defend itself. You disrupt narratives. If someone believes success requires luck and you succeed through discipline, you threaten their belief system. If someone believes emotional vulnerability is weakness and you express feelings with strength, you threaten their identity. If someone believes boundaries push people away and you maintain strong relationships while enforcing them, you contradict their assumptions. Contradictions create tension. Tension creates defensiveness. Defensiveness often becomes dislike. The tragedy is that you may think you have done something wrong. You may shrink, soften, apologize for being visible, attempt to make yourself more digestible. But the issue was never your visibility. It was their invisibility to themselves. When people have not integrated their hidden parts, they are easily disturbed by those who have begun that process. Someone who has faced their insecurities appears grounded. Someone who has confronted their fear appears fearless. Someone who has owned their flaws appears authentic. That level of integration feels foreign to those still fragmented internally. And what is unfamiliar often feels unsafe. So they try to restore safety by minimizing you through gossip, through subtle insults, through withdrawal, through sarcasm masked as humor. These are not random acts. They are attempts to reduce the intensity of the mirror. If they can convince others that you are flawed, arrogant, fake, or problematic, they regain comfort. Because now the narrative shifts from, I feel threatened, to, there must be something wrong with them. It preserves their self-image. Understanding this does not mean you become arrogant. It does not mean you assume everyone who criticizes you is projecting. Sometimes feedback is valid. Sometimes growth requires humility. But there is a difference between constructive criticism and emotionally charged hostility that appears disproportionate to your actions. When someone reacts strongly to your mere existence, your growth, your boundaries, or your self-respect, you are likely touching something deeper than surface level disagreement. You are touching their shadow, and the shadow resists exposure. The more authentic you become, the more polarized reactions you will receive. Some will feel inspired. Others will feel irritated. Both reactions stem from the same root. You are activating something dormant within them. This is why personal development is not universally applauded. Evolution shifts relational dynamics. When one person heals, it destabilizes systems built on shared dysfunction. When one person becomes self-aware, it exposes unconscious patterns in the group. You may lose connections not because you became worse, but because you became clearer. Clarity is confronting, especially to those who avoid introspection. You do not control what others project onto you. You only control whether you absorb it. When someone labels you arrogant, ask yourself honestly if there is truth in it. If not, recognize it as their interpretation shaped by their inner conflict. When someone calls you distant for setting boundaries, examine your behavior. If you acted with integrity, understand that their discomfort may reflect their own struggle with boundaries. The key is self-awareness. If you know who you are, projections lose power. But if you are still unsure of yourself, projections can infiltrate your identity. You begin to question your growth. You dim your light to reduce friction. You shrink your ambition to maintain harmony. And in doing so, you abandon your own integration process to protect someone else's comfort. That is the real danger, because the shadow is not something you eliminate. It is something you acknowledge, understand, and integrate. The more you do that within yourself, the less reactive you become to the projections of others. You stop taking it personally. You begin to see the psychological mechanism at play. And instead of feeling attacked, you feel aware. You recognize that being a mirror is uncomfortable for those who are not ready to look. There is an unspoken agreement that exists in many relationships, families, friendships, and social circles. It is rarely verbalized, but it is deeply enforced. Stay who you've always been, so we can stay comfortable. The moment you begin to outgrow the version of yourself that people are used to, tension begins to form. Not because you've harmed anyone, not because you've betrayed anyone, but because growth disrupts familiarity. Familiarity feels safe. When you decide to think differently, act differently, speak differently, or pursue something greater, you unknowingly violate the emotional contract that says, remain predictable. Most people do not fear your failure. They fear your transformation. When you refuse to stay small, you shift the hierarchy, you shift the dynamics, you shift expectations, and not everyone benefits from that shift. At first, your growth seems admirable. When you talk about improving your life, setting goals, becoming more disciplined, people applaud. They nod. They encourage you. But admiration has a limit. The moment your growth becomes consistent, visible, and real, admiration quietly turns into comparison. Comparison creates discomfort. If you start waking up earlier, reading more, working harder, taking care of your body, investing in your mindset, the people who once felt equal to you may begin to feel behind. Not because you said they were, not because you judged them, but because your action reflects contrast, and contrast highlights difference. When you refuse to stay small, you are no longer participating in collective mediocrity. You are no longer laughing at self-sabotage. You are no longer bonding over complaints and excuses. You begin bonding over vision instead of victimhood. That shift can feel like abandonment to those who are still attached to the old version of you. They might say, you've changed. You're not the same anymore. You think you're better now. But growth requires change, and change is often interpreted as rejection. When you evolve, you are not rejecting people, you are rejecting limitations. But to someone who has built their identity around those limitations, it feels personal. If a friend group is built on partying, and you choose discipline, your choice silently questions the foundation of the group. If your family is built on emotional suppression, and you choose vulnerability, your honesty exposes avoidance. If your workplace thrives on minimal effort, and you choose excellence, your standards create discomfort. You become the outlier, and outliers are unsettling. Human beings are wired for belonging. For most of history, survival depended on fitting in with the tribe. Being excluded meant danger. That instinct still lives within the psyche. So when you choose growth over conformity, your nervous system feels the risk. There is a subtle fear that whispers, if I outgrow them, will I end up alone? That fear keeps many people small. They downplay their ambitions. They hide their intelligence. They suppress their opinions. They dilute their personality, all to maintain harmony. But harmony built on suppression is fragile. When you refuse to stay small, you choose internal alignment over external approval. And that choice changes everything. Suddenly you are no longer easy to control. You are no longer easily guilted in old behaviors. You are no longer manipulated by fear of rejection. You develop boundaries. You say no without over-explaining. You prioritize long-term growth over short-term comfort. That independence can feel threatening to those who benefited from your smaller self. If someone was used to you seeking their validation, your self-assurance removes their leverage. If someone was used to you tolerating disrespect, your boundaries remove their access. If someone was used to you playing less capable, your competence removes their superiority. Your expansion rearranges power dynamics, and people rarely admit they are upset about losing control. Instead, they mask it as concern or criticism. You're working too hard. You're becoming obsessed. Don't forget where you came from. You're changing too much. Sometimes these words carry genuine care, but often they carry discomfort. Growth exposes comfort zones. When you raise your standards, you raise the emotional cost of staying stagnant for everyone around you. You are no longer validating the narrative that this is just how life is. You are proving that change is possible, and proof is confronting, because once change is proven possible, excuses weaken. When you refuse to stay small, you also become more visible. Visibility invites scrutiny. The more you step into leadership, expression, or excellence, the more eyes turn toward you. Some watch with admiration, others watch with skepticism. Some hope you succeed, others wait for you to fail, because your failure would restore equilibrium. It would confirm that staying small was the safer choice. It would justify their inaction. Your success, however, removes their justification. That is why growth can feel isolating. Not because you are wrong, not because you are arrogant, but because expansion naturally separates paths. You begin seeking conversations about purpose rather than gossip. You gravitate toward people who challenge you rather than comfort you. You invest time in building rather than escaping. Your priorities shift. And when priorities shift, compatibility shifts. Some relationships are built around who you were, not who you are becoming. When you refuse to remain that past version, if those relationships strain, it does not mean you stop caring, it means you stop shrinking. Shrinking is exhausting. Pretending not to see opportunities so others feel safe is draining. Silencing your voice to avoid tension erodes self-respect. Staying in environments that limit your potential slowly breeds resentment. Growth, even when lonely, feels cleaner than suppression. The discomfort you experience when outgrowing people is not cruelty. It is differentiation. It is the natural process of defining yourself beyond collective expectations. To stay small is to stay dependent on external approval. To grow is to risk misunderstanding. When you refuse to stay small, you also confront your own fears. It is not just others who resist your expansion. Part of you resists it too. The familiar version of you wants safety. It wants predictability. It wants acceptance. But another part wants evolution. That internal tension is the real battleground. The more you choose evolution, the more your external world reorganizes. Some people step forward to meet your new level. Others step back. Some attempt to pull you down. Others quietly distance themselves. It is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is subtle, fewer invitations, shorter conversations, less enthusiasm. Energy shifts before words do. You begin to realize that staying connected to certain people requires you to shrink again. And you are no longer willing to do that. Refusing to stay small does not mean becoming aggressive or dismissive. It means honoring your potential without apology. It means accepting that not everyone will understand your direction. It means tolerating temporary loneliness in exchange for long-term alignment. It means choosing depth over popularity. When you stop seeking permission to grow, you step into autonomy. Autonomy is powerful, but it is also destabilizing to systems that rely on your compliance. The stronger your identity becomes, the less external validation you require. The less validation you require, the less influence others have over your decisions. The less influence they have, the more uncomfortable they may feel. Not because you attacked them, but because you outgrew the role they assigned to you. There is a silent tension that arises when someone encounters a person who is deeply secure within themselves. It is not loud, it is not dramatic, it is subtle, almost invisible, but it is powerful. When you carry yourself with grounded confidence, emotional stability, and clarity of purpose, you unintentionally become a measuring stick in the minds of others. Not because you asked to be compared, not because you claimed superiority, but because human beings instinctively evaluate themselves in relation to those around them. Comparison is automatic, and when someone already struggles with feelings of inadequacy, your strength can intensify what they try so hard to ignore. Inferiority is rarely about actual ability. It is about internal perception. A person may be talented, intelligent, even accomplished. But if they secretly believe they are not enough, any evidence of competence in someone else can feel threatening. Your calm confidence may highlight their constant self-doubt. Your discipline may expose their inconsistency. Your focus may reveal their distraction. Your self-respect may confront their tolerance of mistreatment. None of this requires you to say a word. Your presence is enough. When someone feels inferior, they experience a quiet internal collapse. It is uncomfortable to admit, even to themselves, that another person embodies qualities they struggle to develop. Rather than confronting this discomfort, the ego seeks relief. And relief often comes through distortion. They may convince themselves that your success is luck. They may assume your confidence is arrogance. They may believe your composure is emotional coldness. They may reduce your discipline to obsession. These distortions serve a purpose. They protect the fragile self-image from further damage. If they can redefine your strength as a flaw, their insecurity feels justified. Inferiority is deeply connected to identity. Many people build their sense of self around being the most intelligent in the room, the most attractive, the most talented, the most needed, or the most dominant. When someone enters who quietly excels without seeking validation, that identity feels unstable. If they were once the most ambitious among their peers, and now you surpass them in consistency, the internal narrative cracks. If they were once the emotionally strong one, and now you display deeper self-awareness, their role weakens. The issue is not that you are better. The issue is that their sense of worth was comparative, not intrinsic. When worth is built on comparison, it requires others to remain at a certain level. Your growth disrupts that balance. This is why insecurity can turn into subtle hostility. You may notice small remarks disguised as jokes, backhanded compliments, unnecessary competition, passive resistance to your ideas. It rarely appears as open hatred. It is more often a slow erosion of warmth, because the more secure you become, the more exposed they feel. Confidence has a quiet intensity. It does not beg for approval. It does not over-explain. It does not shrink to make others comfortable. And that self-assured stillness can be deeply unsettling to someone who relies on external validation to feel stable. When you do not seek their approval, they lose leverage. When you do not react emotionally to their provocations, they lose influence. When you maintain boundaries without aggression, they lose control. And control often compensates for insecurity. Some individuals feel powerful only when they are needed, admired, or dominant. If you are independent and self-sufficient, you remove the opportunity for them to position themselves above you. This can feel like a loss of status. Inferiority is especially triggered when you embody qualities they secretly wish they had the courage to cultivate. A person who longs to leave a toxic environment but stays out of fear may resent your decisiveness. A person who dreams of pursuing a passion but remains trapped in routine may feel irritated by your risk-taking. A person who avoids emotional growth may feel uncomfortable with your introspection. You represent possibility, and possibility is threatening when someone feels stuck. The human psyche seeks equilibrium. If someone feels inadequate, they will unconsciously attempt to restore balance. They may compete with you unnecessarily. They may attempt to diminish your achievements. They may spread subtle doubt about your capabilities to others, not because you harmed them, but because your existence highlights their unhealed areas. This dynamic becomes more intense when you remain humble. If you were arrogant or openly dismissive, their reaction would feel justified. But when you carry strength with grace, their hostility feels confusing even to them. They cannot openly accuse you of wrongdoing, so they search for minor imperfections. No one is perfect, so they magnify small flaws to reduce the psychological gap they feel. If you make a mistake, it becomes proof that you are not as capable as you appear. If you succeed, it must be external advantage. If you remain calm, it must be emotional suppression. These narratives are not about truth. They are about emotional survival. Inferiority thrives in environments where self-worth is unstable. When someone has not built a solid internal foundation, they depend on relative standing. They need to feel ahead of someone to feel secure. When you surpass them, even unintentionally, you disrupt that stability. Your growth becomes a mirror not only of their weaknesses, but of their unrealized strengths. An unrealized strength is painful. It whispers, you could have done more. It reminds them of postponed dreams. It reopens questions they tried to silence. Rather than confronting regret, it is easier to externalize discomfort. So instead of asking, why does this trigger me? They conclude, there is something off about you. This reaction does not mean you are flawless. It means you are integrated enough to provoke comparison. The more you align with your potential, the more polarized reactions you create. Secure individuals will feel inspired. Insecure individuals may feel diminished. It is not your responsibility to manage someone else's sense of worth, but it is your responsibility to remain self-aware. If your confidence becomes arrogance, it will genuinely harm others. But if your confidence is grounded and respectful, their reaction belongs to their internal landscape. You cannot shrink yourself to accommodate unhealed insecurity without abandoning your own development. The paradox is that the stronger you become internally, the less you feel the need to compete. But the more you refuse to compete, the more those who rely on competition feel unsettled. Your composure becomes intimidating. Your silence becomes powerful. Your focus becomes disruptive. And in environments where insecurity dominates, strength is often misinterpreted as threat. You may notice that the more disciplined you become, the more someone tries to distract you. The more emotionally regulated you become, the more someone attempts to provoke you. The more independent you become, the more someone subtly questions your decisions. These are not random behaviors. They are attempts to restore psychological balance. If they can draw you into comparison, conflict, or doubt, they feel equal again. But when you remain steady, you force them to confront themselves. And self-confrontation is uncomfortable. It requires humility. It requires ownership. It requires growth. Not everyone is ready for that, so they may choose resistance instead. Understanding this dynamic does not mean you look down on others. It means you recognize patterns without internalizing blame. When someone reacts negatively to your progress, ask yourself, have I acted with integrity? Have I remained respectful? Have I stayed aligned with my values? If the answer is yes, then their discomfort is likely rooted in their own narrative. You cannot carry both your growth and their insecurity at the same time. At some point, you must decide whether you will dilute yourself to preserve someone else's fragile self-image or continue evolving despite the tension it creates. Because the more fully you step into your capability, the more clearly you expose the difference between self-confidence and self-doubt.